Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to the Alpha Staff webinar series. Today's webinar, Best Practices in Managing Unemployment, is about an hour long with some time for questions at the end. And it is presented by Alpha Staff's own Alex, Sierra, and Art, our unemployment team. Before we begin, I would like to provide a brief technical overview. As you may have noticed, all attendee phone lines are muted and will remain so throughout the presentation. If you have any questions, please enter them via the chat or the Q&A feature as you think of them, or you can wait to enter them at the end of the presentation when we open it up for questions. If you see that you have the chat or the Q&A or don't have access to one or the other, feel free to use either one. They both work the same. Attendance in today's live webinar is approved for 1 credit with both HRCI and SHRM. At the end of the presentation, I'll be sharing the contact information so you can send us over your request and we can send you the certification information as well as a copy of the PowerPoint if you would like. So now I'm going to introduce today's presenters. We have 3 today. Alexandria is our senior unemployment claims specialist, has specialized in unemployment claims for 10 years. And before she came over to Alpha Staff, was employed with a third-party administrator managing unemployment claims activities. So plenty of experience there. We also have Sierra, unemployment claims specialist, and definitely a great addition to our team as she is skilled in professional employer organizations, a PEO such as Alpha Staff, and state unemployment agencies. Worked as an unemployment adjudicator, used federal laws, regulations, and policies to determine eligibility for unemployment benefits, and has worked closely with the Department of Economic Security as a legal assistant on their unemployment team as well. So happy to have her here as well. And then Art is our unemployment claims supervisor who has been handling unemployment claims with Alpha Staff for quite some time. And you guys may have worked with him as well. Unemployment hearing officer with the Florida Department of Economic Opportunity for 14 years. And in addition to that, a business analyst with the Florida Department of Economic Opportunity for 4 years, certified fraud examiner, also has his SHRM SCP and PMP, an air traffic controller tower supervisor for 6 years with the U.S. Marine Corps, and a small business owner. So tons of reputable experience there. And I'm excited to pass this along to you guys. So team, thank you so much for joining, and we give this over to you.
Thank you for that introduction. We're going to start with the general overview. Go ahead and click to the next slide, please. So unemployment is federally mandated. It's an insurance program which is state administered. It's created to provide temporary relief for individuals who lose their employment through no fault of their own. Being a temporary relief is not a long source of income, but it can help get the claimants back on their feet when they're looking for new employment. With the no fault of their own, this is something that can happen to a person, and it can be good or bad, even though they didn't want the event to happen. Something good could be like if their spouse gets a new job and they have to move to a new area. That is no fault of their own, they have to move. Or it can be something bad where a company has gone under and they have to close, which is normally when a layoff happens. Once again, no fault of their own. Go ahead and hit the next slide, please. How is it financed? So it's employer financed, and your role in this is it is employer finance, and if we don't win, it'll affect our tax rate. So your role in is to help keep our participation. With low participation means that we're not going to get a lot of Can you hear me? Hello.
You're cutting out a little bit. I can hear you now, though.
Okay, sorry about that. So all employers pay unemployment tax, and we want to keep that as low as possible. In order to keep this as low as possible, we need your help in participating by documenting anything that comes in, and we'll discuss a little bit more of that later. Go ahead and hit the next slide, please. Eligibility conditions. So to be eligible for unemployment, you need to be unemployed or partially unemployed. So generally speaking, employees that are working on a part-time basis are entitled to collect unemployment benefits. However, if there's like a certain schedule they're able to work or they're not able to work, the state will likely consider that into consideration. They need to have a good like weekly benefit amount, and that varies person to person. The weekly benefit amount is determined by the highest amount of wages paid in the corner of the worker's base period. Earnings are wages earned for hours worked, but they are also payment for unused vacation, holiday, sick pay, severance pays. And if they are receiving any one of those, they might not be considered eligible for those dates that they are getting paid. Um, Able to work is more medically, go back one, slide one. There you go. Able to work, sorry. Able to work is medically. It's normally when someone is sick or maybe they're pregnant. Sometimes if someone quits, they like to ask, did they exhaust all benefits or all options before they quit? You know, did they come to us about their situation? Did they request leave of absence? Or it could be vice versa. Someone's pregnant and we can no longer accommodate them. What did we do for them? Did we offer them a different shift that works better for them, et cetera, et cetera? Did we provide, if they're a receptionist and they're required to stand, what can we do to help them? We can, offer them a seat. And that's if they're not able to work with that, if we have not done everything we can, they have not done everything they can, that is going to determine benefits. Right, go ahead and hit next slide, please. Okay, you also have to be available for work. This is like where they say refuse work or if they're part-time, for example, and they're not willing to work more hours because it's not able to work for them. They say, I'm only able to work 3 hours a week. And they don't really have a reason for that. It's not a compelling personal reason. That is a grounds for disqualification. With any refusals of works, you can definitely email us to the Unemployment Claims Department at alphasoft.com. Let me see, they have the refusal of work is if they refuse a work of referral because they thought that the work was unacceptable, such as like the wages, the hours, or the conditions, if they're not less suitable than the surrounding areas, then that's also grounds for disqualification. Go ahead and hit the next slide. Okay. They have to be actively seeking employment. This is typically between the state and the claimant. I do know that they are required to go in and do weekly searches to show that they have been actively seeking work. They're like, hey, I applied to these places. Unfortunately, we really don't have any says in that. To be eligible, they also have to provide that they have had enough earnings. We talked about the weekly benefit amount, which is the highest amount of wages paid in the quarter. If they have not earned any wages in the quarter or it's been very, very low, then they have not made enough money to qualify for unemployment. Go ahead and hit the next screen. Disqualifying conditions. Go ahead, the next one. Okay, so voluntary resignation without good work connection. That can be, sometimes they do have a compelling personal reason for why someone would voluntarily quit, but it would be a compelling personal reason not contributed to the employer, and therefore we would be non-charged. But another example of a voluntary quit, which would be connected with misconduct, would be a job abandonment. That's not a good reason to quit. It's not without good connection to work. A discharge is for work-related misconduct. It's neglectful, it's willful. Misconduct, their actions were a disregard of the employee's interests, a deliberate violation of the employer's rule. Misconduct may be established if a worker has been reasonably expected to avoid that situation that caused the discharge. The department shall consider the worker's knowledge and the worker's responsibilities throughout the past experiences, explanations, warnings, and other similar occurrences. This means documentation. If it happens to be a one-time thing, they missed work, they were absent, for whatever reason that could be. It could be willful, it could be neglectful, it could be that they didn't bother to call in. If it's a one-time thing, then it's kind of hard to prove misconduct. But if this has happened over and over again, where this person should know that it's reasonable expectations to call in for work and provide a reason, and it's happened over and over again. If we don't have the documentation on that, it's hard to prove that them missing work was against our was a deliberate violation of our rules. Go ahead, hit the next slide, please. So there's a difference between poor performance and misconduct. Typically, someone who has been fired for poor performance will qualify for unemployment, but this is because they cannot do the job. They have tried the best of their abilities. It's not because they're not wanting to do the job or because they're neglectful or anything like that. They just simply cannot perform the act of the job. So misconduct, as we were speaking about, is they just don't want to do the job. It's just it's negligent. It's willful actions. So once again, why do we need to document misconduct? So us as employers need to provide evidence that the discharge was a disregard of our interests, such as the attendance again. Attendance is a very popular one. Attendance is misconduct because the employment was terminated because they did not provide proper notice of their employer of their absence from work. They were aware that the notice was required. They have not shown good cause for failing to provide notice as required, and their actions are a disregard of their employer's interests. Once again, this is normally not a one-time thing. We need to prove the documentation of this. So it has to be like a reoccurring event of them will not do the work. All right, go ahead and hit the next slide, please. Employer complaints. All right, hit the next slide. So what to do if someone wants to, what if we do if we want someone to collect unemployment? Unfortunately, it is not up to Alpha staff, it is up to the state. Without protesting the claims properly, there's a risk of potential charges and liability. There is no way to guarantee that the claimant will even get benefits since it is up to the state. What we can do is if the claimant wins a decision, we can choose not to appeal it, but as far as not responding or giving accurate information is not an alternative we can provide. Our job is to respond to claims and to help us get relief of charges. We need to provide timely, accurate information, and not contesting can actually impact our rate. Go ahead and hit the next slide, please. And then here is our 2023 SIDES Award. This is our 4th year with this award, and at the end of the day, it ties back to our rate. This shows that we have handled all of our claims timely and accurately, which helps keep the cost low. Go ahead and hit the next slide, and I'm going to pass this off to Alex.
Thank you, Sierra. So next, we were going to be speaking about critical documents through the HR Alpha staff system in PRISM. So some key documents that you can find under your PRISM, under the HR section in PRISM, is an Alpha Staff's forms library, which will contain some specific documents, such as a disciplinary action form or a separation form, and then a resource library that will contain some helpful information if you have any questions pertaining to anything involved with Alpha staff. It has unemployment documents, what to do, and along with that. Next slide, please. So documentation that supports the position, specifically critical documents that we need when protesting an unemployment claim. When it comes to us proving discharge as related to misconduct, we would need an employee handbook acknowledgement. Now, if you are on electronic onboarding with Alpha staff, we would actually have these directly in our system. So at the time of the separation, we will review the information in the PRISM system. And if we do have this handbook acknowledgement, it would not be requested. But if you are not part of an electronic onboarding, a handbook acknowledgement would be requested at the time that we are sending an email. Applicable portion of the employee handbook. Once again, if you are part of the electronic onboarding, we should have your handbook available. But if not, we would need the portion of the handbook that was violated. Disciplinary action. This can be found in the Alpha Staff Resource Library. This is specifically used for any disciplinary action that you want to take with an individual, for any warnings. We also do ask for discharge misconduct cases that witness statements be provided. Please ensure that they are legibly signed and dated, and they do provide details regarding the incident in question. Employee time and attendance, documentation that pertains to the occurrence. When it comes to attendance cases, we do want to ensure that it provides the date, the reason if one was provided, if they did or did not call in. Performance appraisals, appraised by 90 days and annually. Once again, performance appraisals can be found in our resource library. For resignations, we would request a resignation statement, their letter, email, a text message even, that documentation to show that the individual had separated by a resignation. An exit interview, if you would like one to be conducted, can also be found in the Alpha Staff Resource Library. And then the notice of employee separation, this can be used for both a discharge as well as a resignation separation. That specific document will ask for information pertaining to the individual and their separation from employment, which can be found in the Alpha Staff Forms Library, Resource Library. Next slide, please. So the Alpha Staff Forms Library, you actually can get a separation request form, but also it has the option to terminate employee and upload the proper documentation. So as you see on the screen, a separation request form would be asked to fill out the pertinent information pertaining to the employee at the top. You'll have a section down below for the termination explanation, and you can also select a separation reason. Next slide, please. Here is a bigger section of that separation request form, just showing you the top again, pertaining to the individual as well as your company, the termination dates, separation information. We do ask down below in that termination explanation, please provide as much details as possible for the final incident and the reason for separation in this section. Next slide, please. From the resource library, you can see that there are quite an amount of different documents that can be found, but as you see down below, towards the end of it, highlighted is the employee disciplinary action form, which is a PDF document that you can download and fill out pertaining to a warning that you want to provide to an individual. Next slide. And this is what that disciplinary action form shows. It can either be used for verbal, written, final, or termination. Of course, you can also select the nature of the offense. Was it attendance? Was it insubordination, performance? We do ask that if you provide as much details as possible, this would only help our case. And at point, we can also utilize this and maybe not request as much information at the very beginning of our requesting to you via email. So we also want to note that witnesses should take detailed notes of the meeting. If you can, have the employee sign it and date it. If the employee does not sign and date, then of course you want to notate that as well. Next slide. Here is the notice of the employee separation. At the top, you'll fill it out with your company name, the employee name, and then you will also include the last day of work and their termination date. There are different types of sections that you can select: misconduct, resignation, poor performance, lack of work, or miscellaneous. Selecting one of these and then providing down below the remarks, once again, as much details as possible, will only help your Alpha Staff Unemployment Claims team. Here is a bigger section. As you can see, there are a lot of different options that you can select in the misconduct, resignation, poor performance, and lack of work sections. Those just provide a little bit more detail, and then down below you can provide the specifics pertaining to the separation. Within PRISM HR Alpha Staff system, you can actually terminate an individual by selecting HR at the top, HR Alpha Staff, and then under the HR action, you will select employee termination. Next slide. which then you will have an opportunity to upload employee documents. On the right-hand side, there is an actions, and then you will drop down to a document section. To load a document, it's down below in yellow. Here, we would actually suggest uploading any documentation. You can upload a resignation letter, you can upload previous disciplinary actions, termination documents, any documentation you want to add on a specific employee, you can certainly do so here. And your Alpha Staff Unemployment Claims Team will actually have access to these documents. And then furthermore, in the employee termination, along with the uploading of documentation, you will just have to select a termination status code, reason code, termination date, and then once again, providing a termination explanation, being specific details to the final incident, helps your unemployment claims team. If you are able to provide more specific details, then we can, when an unemployment claim comes in, we can actually get a little bit clearer picture and then specify more furthermore the questions that we are needing that cannot be answered immediately. Now I am going to turn it over to Art Leisure, and he's going to be talking about the best practices.
Thanks, Alex. Best practices. I'm not going to read the entire slides for you. We'll distribute the deck later, but there are some points I want to hit on. Immediate documentation. This keeps the disciplinary process moving, and if you don't do it, it limits your options. If someone is violating your policy, the hearing officer is going to want to see a pattern of infraction followed by warning, infraction followed by warning. If you let the infractions build up and only give them one warning, they're going to feel like they have not been properly warned that their behavior could lead to dismissal, and it'll work against us. Discipline immediately. It's when your memory is clearest, you'll be able to give more detail and it will make us look more credible. But it also, they look for clear nexus between the final incident and the dismissal. If there's not a close period of time or short period of time between the incident and dismissal, they're going to conclude that the dismissal wasn't really caused by that incident. So it's important. Use objective language. Saying someone was not a team player, or saying they had a bad attitude, or you saying that their actions were misconduct, that's meaningless to them. Just describe what the behavior or what the action was. Terminate weak employers who show little to no improvement as soon as possible. We can capitalize on the probation periods that are in some states, or at the very least, we can limit employer charges. Next. Actually, you know what? I'm sorry. Go back, please. Provide timely, adequate, and accurate information. That's so important. You're the tip of the spear, and we need you to get this information to us as quickly as possible. The adjudicators at the different states may be juggling 10, 15 different determinations that they're working on simultaneously, and they don't have a lot of time to make their decisions. Sometimes they don't even give you as much time as they're supposed to give you. And it's important for us to win the initial determination. Why is it important? Well, if we win, very often the claimant won't even bother to appeal. They figure the system has spoken. Even if they do appeal, they have the burden of timeliness. They've got the burden of filing the appeal in the manner prescribed by the state, and they have the burden of filing that appeal on time. These things add up, and if we do everything right on our end and we handle it quickly, it probably doubles our chance of success. And it can actually even affect the order of testimony in a hearing. And this, I'm sure you've all encountered this, where the claimant said, I was discharged. You said, well, no, you said you were quitting. If the adjudicator finds that the claimant actually quit, and the claimant contends they were discharged, that means that the claimant is going to have to testify first. They're going to have to give their closing statement first in the hearing. And that gives us a pretty significant advantage. Next slide, please. Disciplinary process should be structured. The discipline should be objective and predictable. An employee should know that if they violate policy A, the first time is going to be a warning, the second time would be a fine, a warning, third time dismissal, or whatever your policy is. But it shouldn't be seat of your pants. It should be very clear and laid out. The elements of a good warning, the specific information about the infraction, as I said, speak to it objectively. A space for the employee to respond. Why is that important? Because by putting something in there about saying that signing does not indicate agreement, it removes an excuse that they have for not signing it. And therefore, it helps to prove that they were at least informed. And if you have a space on there for their comments, it gives them room to make an incriminating statement, even if they don't realize it. That happens a lot. Witness statements, that's important. Those don't have to be given to the employee until we submit them at the hearing. Abide by your own handbook. If you don't, they're not policies, they're recommendations. And it would be better not to have a handbook than to have a handbook that the company doesn't follow. And to the extent possible, rely upon stable, long-term employees as witnesses. Well, number one, they're probably going to be better witnesses, but number two, it's going to be a lot more likely that they're there to testify for you. Some states are very slow about processing their claims. In Florida, we were pretty quick. In some states, they're really slow. We get 3-year-old claims all the time. And, you know, if you're in a business with a high turnover, like a restaurant, it can be difficult to find witnesses to the original infraction. So stable long-term witnesses whenever possible. Next slide, please. Length of time between warnings. An employee is warned because he was tardy and then isn't warned again until 3 years later, doesn't have a tardiness problem. That the pace of it is important. It's something that will be considered when they're rendering a decision. Legible copy of documentation. I've encountered this many times. Lots of documentation, none of it I can read. So type it if possible, or if not, if your handwriting is like mine, have somebody else write it out. Supporting evidence related to the warnings, especially if refused to sign. If they sign, you know, A, it shows that they got it. B, there's possibility of incrimination, or better yet, admission against interest. And things like text messages, time and attendance records, emails, all that's important. So please preserve it. Prior warnings related to the reason for termination, that's pretty obvious. And is the infraction based on a written policy? That's important. It's not all important. I mean, there's some times where you're not going to have it in your policy handbook. Well, he was selling crack back in the back room. You don't need a specific policy to address that. It's pretty obvious. But in most cases, they'd like to see something was covered in your employee handbook. Next slide, please. Special provisions. States with probationary period, for example, Florida, employed 90 days or less. That's why I say terminate weak performers quickly. If somebody is clearly not going to work out, why let them stick around? If you can get rid of them within an established 90-day probationary period for poor performance. Established means that it's part of your policy. You've informed them at the time of the hire, and you document the poor performance. I mean, you still have to document that. Next slide, please. Provide timely responses to our inquiries. I got it in red because if you take nothing else away from the presentation, please take that away. Sometimes we don't mean to nag you, but Sometimes we're really pressed for time. States, even they have requirements to mail it and give us a certain amount of time for the date of mailing. And that's federal requirement. They can't really escape that. But we've all dealt with the vagaries of the postal system, particularly, now with Amazon and everybody else selling things by mail. Mail is just slower than it used to be. And we get notices all the time with like 1-2 days notice. So if we ask you, please have it back to us by close of business today, I understand that it is not convenient, and believe me, we don't want to even ask you to do that, but it's for a very important reason. Next slide, please. Okay. I don't have anything to add to what's written here. We'll distribute the deck for you. Need assistance, contact the team. We are all happy to talk about unemployment whenever you have a question. I'm much older than Alex and Sierra, and so consequently, I love to talk. So if you have this email address is not correct, it's alazier@alphastaff.com. But if you have any questions about unemployment, please don't hesitate to reach out.
Okay, at this time, we want to invite you to ask your questions. As a reminder that you guys are muted right now, so if you want to use the Q&A or chat feature, thank you so much, team. I just have a few plugs for myself. In here, you mentioned handbook a few times and how important that is. And I know a handful of my clients and a handful of, I'm sure, everyone else's. Some of our teams don't have handbooks. So just an encouragement, if you don't have a handbook, work with your HR account manager to get one. We can put it into your electronic onboarding system. That way that handbook acknowledgement is in the system when your employees go through onboarding, so that our unemployment claims team can go ahead and pull that acknowledgement from there. So if you haven't gone through and did your handbook with your HR account manager, or if you haven't updated it in a while, go ahead and do that.
Yeah, that's really critical. That's something they look for in establishing misconduct, is the claimant knew or should have known that such and such a behavior could lead to their dismissal. Well, if it is a policy that's outlined in the employee handbook and they signed acknowledgement of receipt of that handbook with the acknowledgement that they were expected to familiarize yourself with it, then that's almost an open and shut case.
Perfect. All right, and I'm going to, as the questions are coming in, I'm going to go ahead and show this slide to you guys for copies of the presentation and credits for HRCI and SHRM. Go ahead and send an email to webinars@alphastaff.com. We'll create your certificate and we'll send you a copy of the presentation if you would like. So that's webinars@alphastaff.com. You can give us a call if you have a question. Otherwise, we'll be able to send that directly through email. All right, and if there are no questions, I'll keep it open. We will have another webinar, so be sure to join us June 15th at 2 p.m. and we're going to be going over legal updates for employers. It's going to be hosted by our partner Jackson Lewis, who will be joining to give us some important information and things we should be on the lookout for as far as legal updates throughout the year. I know there have been a few things that have just come out this month, so definitely check in for that and see what's happening in your area. Please take a couple minutes after the presentation to provide your feedback. There will be a survey at the end. We definitely read all of that. We take into consideration all of your suggestions. We want to know what you guys are interested in for future webinars. So any feedback is very welcome, and we thank you guys for that. All right, I haven't seen any other questions in here. I just want to encourage everybody, if you do have questions, you can reach out to your HR account manager. You can also reach out to the unemployment claims team, and we're all happy to answer the questions. As you guys know, the rate that we have for unemployment is directly fed from how great our unemployment team does at answering these cases and ultimately winning these cases. So we thank them for that, and we encourage everybody to stay into contact with us and the team. If you have questions, by all means ask them. It's better to have more documentation than not enough. So keep that in mind. And if you are worried about your progressive discipline program, if you need help with that, your HR account manager can also work with you to create a plan for that as well. So if there is anything else, please feel free to ask. If not, we're going to go ahead and close us out. Again, I'm going to put on the screen this webinar is at alphastaff.com email. Feel free to send us an email. We'll give you the certification information as well as a copy of the presentation. And if you have any questions after this and you think about them, you can send them to that email as well, and we can get you in touch with the team as well. So with that said, I want to thank you guys for joining, and thank you to our unemployment team for hosting. And I hope you guys all have a wonderful day, and we will see you next time.